Good evening, team, and welcome to the July 28th edition of the Planning Commission, Portland Planning Commission. I will be your chair, Steph Routh. With us, we are all in person today. July Madness. We've got Vice Chair Pollock, Commissioner Thompson, Commissioner Brannon, Commissioner Alvarado, Commissioner O'Mara, Commissioner Ames, Vice Chair Spivak, and Commissioner Knowles. And today's edition highlights the Housing Bonus Alignment Project, and then we're going to have an informational presentation on the Design Review Report Form. And with that, would welcome any items of interest from commissioners, and I have conscripted Commissioner Alvarado to share some good news. Consider doing so.
About a little over a week, PBOT organized a e-bike ride to try to break Seattle's e-bike record, and not only was it a world-breaking situation, I think it was over 1,060 people having fun riding an e-bike and breaking the Guinness World Record here in Portland.
There you go. Woo! We have editorials that we did not share on that one. Other items of interest? Okay. I would just like to acknowledge that our state, like many states, is experiencing incredible wildfires. This is becoming the new norm, and a call to renew for climate action. And now with that, would love to share Chief Planner Diefendorfer with the Director's Report at your leisure.
Thank you so much, Chair, Vice Chairs, Commissioners. Happy, what day is today? I don't even know what day today is. I was going to say the date, and I don't know what date it is. 7/28, sorry about that. It's a Tuesday. Happy Tuesday. All right, I don't have too much to share, just a couple of things. One is, as many of you know, there are 5 of the 9 commissioners whose terms expire in 2027. So we will begin what is generally a lengthy process to appoint new commissioners. We anticipate opening the recruitment on August 17th and then leaving it open for a month. So it would close on September 14th. And, at some point in that time, we would assess whether we're getting enough applicants and just determine whether that needs to be extended or not. But I will be sending an email out. I was supposed to do it today. My notes say today, but it's not going to happen today. But I will be sending an email out soon, very soon, to those whose terms are expiring to just connect with you and to understand what your interest is and your plans are for the future. And I will be talking with you more about that. And then I think the other thing we wanted to highlight is that we have started to do some early engagement for the Inner East zoning project. And you will see that team out and about at a lot of community events this summer. And I think coming up this Sunday, they will be at the Willamette River Northreach. They will be at the Sunday Parkways. That's for the Willamette River Northreach project. And then for the Inner East project, they will be at some community events on August 7th and August 23rd. So the website has more information on those for anyone who's interested. Just wanted to make you aware that those are 2 projects that are in early launch phase, and outreach is beginning on those in earnest. So I don't have anything else to update on right now. Happy to answer any questions and to turn it back to you, Chair Routh.
Thank you very much. And with that, our consent agenda, which is composed entirely of our July 14th meeting minutes. Some braids of soul like to move. Commissioner Knowles, thank you for saving me. Is there a second? Commissioner Brannon, all in favor? All right, unanimously passed, and we're done. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, and now the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. I would love Ariel Kane to join us, and while she is coming up, an acknowledgement. This is a public hearing, so we're first going to hear a briefing from staff and then invite testimony ahead of our deliberations. Before we begin, are there any disclosures that anyone wishes to make? Seeing none. Ariel, Tom, Morgan, and team.
There we go. Hi, good evening. Thank you for having us today. My name is Ariel Kane. I'm an economic planner at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and I'm joined today by Morgan Tracy online, a senior planner also at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and Tom Armstrong, a supervising planner at BPS. Today, we have a briefing alongside a hearing for the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. Apologies, I am clicking. We'll get through it. All right, so in general, we're just going to cover the background of the project, the scope, the proposals that we are hoping for you all to review, the expected outcomes, some of the engagement that we did leading to these proposals. We will also be joined later by our intern, Abby Griffith, to talk about the accessible housing interview work that we did together, and then we'll wrap up with next steps. The Housing Bonus Alignment Project is a suite of zoning code amendments that will better support our housing production by revising and expanding our current housing zoning incentives. Right now, we have bonuses. We've been told they're a bit complicated to find, complicated to implement, and have had limited use since being adopted. And citywide, we also know we're struggling to make projects pencil. So as markets shift, we believe it's valuable to assess our code and how it's working and how it can be improved at regular intervals so that we can meet both current and future conditions. And also, when developers are ready to build, we want to be able to offer a way for them to voluntarily provide the units that we think Portlanders need, namely more affordable, 2 or more bedroom, and accessible units. Resultingly, we hope that these proposals before you today are going to be effective at incentivizing those types of units. I'll share some brief information about why we're taking on this project right now. As you remember, or as you might remember, through the adopted housing needs analysis in 2023 and the housing production strategy in 2024, we identified the likely demand that Portlanders will have for housing as we plan for the next 20 years. And then we created a 6-year action plan, the housing production strategy, on how we're going to address that need. And so this project is one of those 35 actions that we're taking over the next 5 years so that we can continue our commitment to support the development of housing across the city. In the housing needs analysis, we had estimated that more than 70% of our new housing would be in multi-dwelling buildings, and up to half of our new housing, or about up to 63,000, needed to be affordable at 80% area median income or below. We also know that about 36,000 units will be needed for larger households or households with children, and about 27,000 units will be needed for households with members who have disabilities or who have older adults in the home. However, we know that not enough new housing is being built right now with these household needs being accounted for, specifically those affordable units, units with more than 1 bedroom, and accessible units. For our lowest earning households, as I mentioned, over the next 20 years, we need at least 37,000 new units that are affordable to those lower income earning households. Not only do we have that future need to plan for, but we also know that right now that there are Portlanders across all income bands who are in housing that they can't afford comfortably and are cost burdened. We also know that it's not just the availability of housing Portlanders can afford, but the right kind of unit that matters. So between 2010 and 2024, the number of studio and 1-bedroom units has outpaced other unit sizes in development. These units also are tending to have higher vacancy rates than our larger units, so 9% compared to 4%. At the same time, we're having households of all sizes growing, and we're seeing an increase in larger non-family and family households, so sort of underscoring that demand for units that have more than 1 bedroom. Within our households, our ages and abilities are also shifting, not just here in Multnomah County, but across the U.S. We're continuing to age in our communities, and the demand for accessible units for individuals of all ages and abilities is also going to be continuing to grow. The other unit types are a bit more self-explanatory, so I'm going to pause here. I know Morgan touched on this in a prior briefing, but for folks tuning into this briefing, I wanted to again touch on what we mean by accessible housing types in our proposals. So here you see what I'm calling the elevator of accessibility. And on the first floor is visitable, which is in the zoning code. It's that lower level of accessibility. So someone with a mobility disability is at least able to visit the first floor of the home. The other types of accessibility really increase the requirements for routes to and within units. So as you go up to the next floor, that will consider things like door widths, turning spaces for mobility devices, grab bars, and then the higher level of accessibility that's up here, not addressed in our proposals, but also considers things like communication accessibility within the home. So generally speaking, via the building code, apartments are already required to include some type B, so what we consider adaptable, especially if the building has an elevator, but only 2% really requires the units to be, only 2% is required to be type A, so that's a slightly higher level of accessibility. So in a 100-unit building, that's only 2 units that would be considered fully accessible. We were fortunate enough to tour the new M. Carter Commons before they opened. So a senior housing development funded in part by the city and a partnership between Urban League and the Northwest Housing Alternatives. And it's just an example of what even higher levels of accessibility might look like inside of a home. So this includes low storage spaces, removable cupboards, roll-under sinks, front controls on appliances, and easy access to grab bars and seats in our bathrooms. More accessible units like these means more people will have better and adequate access to the essential functions in their home. And if I might say, it's not a bad looking unit, it's a type A unit, so a slightly more accessible level. All right, so I'll jump into how this project will likely help meet those needs. The scope of the project is pretty limited to the multi-dwelling residential and commercial mixed-use zones, where most of our existing zoning bonuses are already applicable, and where we are already able to build the most densely. So you might see these along Woodstock, 122nd, Division, Interstate, sort of our centers and corridors. On the map on the screen, the project proposals don't really impact the areas in that gray hue. The center is, the Central City, where our sort of sibling project, Central City Code Amendments project, already addressed some of the bonuses there, which you guys have already been briefed on. And we also have certain plan district areas which have their own set of incentives, and in some cases, they either match or exceed those proposed bonuses also. I made sure that I printed this out for you all too. I know it's really hard to see, but the multi-dwelling and commercial zones, so residential, so RM and CM zones, I wanted you to see the sort of scale of buildings that are possible in these zones around our centers and corridors and near our single-dwelling residential areas. The types of new development in these zones can really range from duplexes to small apartment buildings to a more diverse range of higher density structures, and buildings in these zones might range from 2 to 7 stories or higher. And this is just a snapshot of the quantity of lots that we have in these zones right now. Specifically, we have a large amount of RM1, RM2, and CM2 zones. Those are our lower density zones in the multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones. And then before we get too far in, what is a bonus? Hopefully the screen will change for you all soon. But, yeah. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. So the scope of this project is exclusively zoning incentives, so the additional development that's allowed in exchange for certain public benefits, not direct financial incentives. So our primary levers in the zoning code are additional floor area ratio, so that building square footage relative to site size, additional height, so how tall your building can be, and building coverage, how much of the land can be covered by a development. In our RM and CM zones, we do have 6 bonuses already. The first 2 are inclusionary housing and affordable commercial. Inclusionary housing is not included in this project as it's already undergone its own recalibration study and will soon also undergo another recalibration. And affordable commercial, it's not being revised as a part of this project as it deals exclusively with commercial space. So we're looking at these 4 other voluntary bonuses so that they can be a bit more usable with the existing bonuses. All right, so these 4 main bonuses are for deeper housing affordability, which is incentivizing units for low-income households when a development has at least 50% of those units set aside. Of these bonuses, it's currently the most used, but it's mostly used by affordable housing developers. It's typically when they're already doing 100% affordable projects. The visibility bonus is for units that are meeting that lowest level of accessibility I mentioned, but still is allowing folks with mobility disabilities to visit the first floor of a home. However, the bonus as it's currently written is not available to most multi-dwelling or apartment developments. The 3-bedroom bonus similarly has a 50% requirement that units must have 3 or more bedrooms, and it must also apply a 10-year affordability covenant at 100% area median income. And then lastly, we have the planned development bonus, which functions more as a small master plan site. And it has things like added design requirements, energy efficiency requirements, and also affordability built into it. Of the bonuses, only the deeper affordable bonus gets all 3 of those incentives that I mentioned. So it gets both FAR, height, and coverage. The others get FAR only, except for planned development, which gets FAR and height. And then since the adoption of these bonuses, there's been no documented use of the visitable bonus and limited use of the 3-bedroom and planned development bonus. So really underscoring that need for the review and deeper analysis of these bonuses. The bonus analysis that we've conducted is summarized in the staff report and appendices. We'll save you today from most of that analysis, but they led to the following proposals. And so Morgan will take us through those.
Thank you, Ariel. Just for the record, Morgan Tracy, Senior Planner with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The following slides are going to go into greater detail, but just to summarize, the 4 key proposals of this project are expanding the locations where bonuses are available, revising what is being required in order to earn the bonus, improving the value of the incentive we're offering in exchange, and making other fine-tuning changes to improve implementation and get better outcomes. The first proposal is pretty straightforward. We're expanding the bonuses to include more zones. This proposal ensures that the same types of housing bonuses that are available in the CM zones are available in the RM zones and vice versa. For instance, the deeper affordability bonus is expanded to the CM zones, which allows nonprofit housing providers to leverage development sites in those areas. Likewise, the accessibility bonus and multiple bedroom bonuses are being expanded to the CM zones as well, because accessible, affordable, and family-sized housing is needed throughout all of these areas. And similarly, the planned development bonus, currently only available in the CM zones, is being expanded to the RM zones as well. Our second proposal looks at balancing the public benefit, which are the bonus requirements, with the proposed incentives, for example, extra FAR, height, or coverage for each of the bonuses. When the bar is set too high, people are not inclined to try and jump it. We'll cover the revised incentives as part of Proposal 3. The deeper affordability bonus is the most used voluntary bonus. As such, there are no changes proposed for these requirements, which is essentially half of the units available at 60 or 80% AMI. Ariel shared that the current visibility bonus has never been used. This meant that we needed to take a closer look at those requirements. Because the visible bonus is preempted by building code for commercial buildings, it is not an available option for much of our higher density residential development. We upgraded the visible bonus to be an accessibility bonus, which relies on the standardized set of accessibility requirements that exist in the building code. By doing that, the bonus will now be available to more building types like apartments and condos, and not just middle housing or townhouses. The number of type A units represents an increase from the building code requirement of 2% and increases that to 25% of units. But based on our modeling, this was found to be a fairly low cost, low impact way to earn building incentives. For the multiple bedroom bonus, there were a couple of challenges. First, the requirement for half of the units being 3 or more bedrooms is far outside what the market is typically producing. In other words, a very tall bar. Second, we heard that the imposition of the affordability covenant added administrative complexity and limited who could rent those units. Consequently, we reduced the number of units required from 50% to 25% and allowed for 2 or 3 or more bedroom units to qualify. This is still a stretch from what the market has produced in larger developments, but is feasibly still within reach. Also, we replaced the affordability covenant with inherent price limits through maximum allowed sizes, such as 1,000 square feet for a 2-bedroom unit, 1,200 square feet per 3 or more bedroom unit. Developers were supportive of this change as it not only reduced encumbrances on the project, but also doesn't limit someone from renting the unit based solely on income. We also included an option that makes the bonus achievable for smaller projects like townhouses by allowing incremental additional floor area for each 3-bedroom unit that it provides. This option, however, does not come with additional height or building coverage. For the plan development bonus, the 2 major changes to the project requirements are reducing the minimum site size from 2 acres to 40,000 square feet, which significantly increases the pool of sites that can use the bonus. And in recognition of the smaller site sizes, we added a mid-level range of height limits for projects on sites below 80,000 square feet. Okay, so we've talked about how we made the bonuses more widely available and right-sized the requirements to make them achievable. The third proposal improves the value of the incentives to better align with the requirements. You could think of this as the compensation package. Ariel described the 3 basic types of zoning bonuses and incentives that we can offer, which are additional floor area, building height, and coverage. So one big change we made is allowing multiple bonuses to stack together. For example, in the current code, you can either seek the inclusionary housing bonus or the deeper affordability bonus or bonuses for 3-bedroom and visitable units, but not all those bonuses together. The proposal would allow the inclusionary housing bonus to be stacked on the deeper affordability bonus and on the accessibility bonus and multi-bedroom bonus. This creates incentives to produce multiple types of needed housing in the same project. However, in order to enable multiple bonuses to stack, we needed to ensure that there was sufficient allowable building envelope to receive the bonus floor area. In several zones, we found that we were starting from a deficiency in terms of allowable height or coverage to achieve the current bonus FAR. The proposal includes a higher maximum floor area across the multi-dwelling and commercial mixed-use zones, ranging from additional 0.5 to 2.0. We also added an exception to FAR when floor area is used for ground floor type A accessible units. To provide room for this additional allowed floor area, this meant increasing maximum building height or coverage, or sometimes both. Currently, the bonus height is very limited in mixed-use commercial zones and maxes out at 10 additional feet in the multi-dwelling zones. So these maximum height limits have been increased by 10 additional feet in most multi-dwelling zones, with larger increases of 20 to 35 feet in the mixed-use zones. We also included exceptions to the step-down heights when height bonuses were being used. For building coverage, we increased the bonus in zones where the maximum was less than 85%, like the RM1 and RM2 zones, and we reduced the side and rear setbacks in the RM3 and RM4 zones to increase the achievable building coverage. Once we made those refinements, we needed to make adjustments to each bonus so that they'll all work together. For the deeper affordability bonus, we made minor changes to the amount of bonus building coverage available in the RM zones. For the accessibility bonus, previously only bonus FAR was included, and now this bonus includes a small increase in coverage as well as additional building height. Similarly, the multiple bedroom bonus is proposed to include a small increase in coverage and height in addition to the extra FAR. This bonus included an option to earn incremental floor area for each 3-bedroom unit as well. Finally, for the plan development bonus, building heights were tailored to better match different site sizes, and building coverage was revised to be a consistent maximum of 85% across all the zones. An incentive was also added for mass timber buildings to allow them to use taller maximum heights on sites that are less than 80,000 square feet. So these next 3 slides will show some visual comparisons of the current base, current bonus, and proposed bonus, FAR, building coverage, and height maximums. So first, let's look at the FAR proposed in the RM1 zone. On the left is the base FAR max of 1 to 1. In the middle, the current bonus bumps that up to 2 to 1. And the proposed bonus on the right increases that to 2.5 to 1. To reach the full maximum bonus FAR, this project would need to stack 25% of the units as accessible, 25% of the units with 2 or 3 bedrooms, and 20% of the units meaning inclusionary housing affordability. For building coverage, here's an example using the RM2 zone. The base coverage is 60%. Under the current bonus, only deeper housing affordability earned that 10% bump. Now, additional coverage can be earned through the accessibility and multiple bedroom bonuses as well. Finally, for maximum height, here's an example using the CM2 zones. The base height is 45 feet. The CM2 zone currently has a 10-foot height bonus, but that is only available in design and historic overlays on sites with specific comprehensive plan map designations, so a pretty limited pool. The proposed bonus height is increased to 75 feet and would now be available throughout the CM2 zone. To earn this proposed bonus height, the project would need to combine several bonuses like inclusionary housing, multi-bedroom, and affordable commercial. If the building design simply needed a little bit of more height, like 5 more feet, then the accessibility bonus would be a way to achieve that. In addition to expanding the height bonus to more bonus types and more zones, we also made some other changes to accommodate additional FAR when the height bonuses were being used. I mentioned in the RM3 and RM4 zones, there are side and rear setbacks that increase from 5 feet to 10 feet for buildings that are taller than 55 feet. However, for projects that earn bonus height, the regular 5-foot side and rear setbacks will apply. We found from our analysis that increased setbacks were more limiting than the building coverage on the building floor plate. For projects that are across a local street from a single dwelling zone, the step-down height requirement would be waived when bonus height is being used. And for projects that abut a single dwelling zone, the step-down height limit is increased from 35 feet to 45 feet. And the fourth and final proposal includes several fine-tuning revisions to the code to make the bonuses function better. To improve the housing affordability outcomes on sites that propose more than 20 units, but inclusionary housing is not triggered because no single building has more than 20 units, the bonuses would require that voluntary inclusionary housing be used before the other bonuses may be used. We clarified a number of code provisions as well. In the Main Street Overlay Zone, we clarified that the CM1 zone is eligible to use the base zone bonuses. We added dimensional standards for indoor common areas, since these spaces can be substituted for outdoor area, but they currently lack dimensional requirements. We included a basic definition of bedroom to clarify what will meet the requirement to earn the multiple bedroom bonus. And to improve the usability of the code, we consolidated the bonuses into a single section, elevated the specific increments of FAR, height, and coverage earned per bonus, and made the code more consistent between the multi-dwelling and mixed-use zones. And lastly, because many of the same bonus types and incentives that exist in the senior and disabled high-density housing chapter will now be available in the base zones, this chapter is being deleted. And that's it for the proposals. I'll turn it back to you, Ariel.
Okay, thank you, Morgan. I'll just share a bit about expected outcomes from these proposals. So as we were working on these proposals, we worked with other staff and a consultant to model how these proposals might impact development choice and feasibility. In all cases, the bonuses resulted in increased inclusionary housing units, 2-bedroom units, and type A units. And per consultant, there was an especially relative ease of accommodating the accessibility bonus when the unit was changing from a type B to type A unit. And I'll just show a few examples, but for context, we modeled the 4 most common zones in our buildable lands inventory. So RM1, RM2, CM2, and CM3. And we modeled mostly 5,000 square foot and 10,000 square foot sites because these are also our most prevalent site sizes as well. This is an example using our RM1 base zone requirements on the left, and on the right, the application of just one bonus, the multiple bedroom bonus. In this case, the base zone might accommodate 5 2-bedroom units, but with the bonus, it could increase all units to be 3-bedroom units and potentially add a 6th additional unit. RM1 zones are that lower density zone that I mentioned before and are most commonly near our residential neighborhoods. And on small sites in these lower density zones, we expect that it's likely realistic for just one bonus to get fully maximized. This is just some real world examples. These are not in RM1, but of 2- and 3-story townhomes similar to what was modeled. In CM2, a mixed-use zone like you might find along Woodstock or Interstate or Division, this is what you might expect to be built on a 10,000 square foot lot with today's base standards on the left. You might be able to get a 40-unit, 5-story building with some tuck-under parking. The middle prototype shows the application, again, of just one bonus, the multiple bedroom bonus, where we increase by about 10 units. Most of those in them were 2 bedrooms. And then lastly, because it's a larger site with a little bit more density allowed, we expect that you'd be able to add in a second bonus. In this case, it's combining the multiple bedroom bonus and the accessible bonus. That increases the units by about 17. Most of them are type A units, and you're able to get up to 7 stories with about 60 units total. Again, just some current day examples of some 5 to 7 story buildings in our commercial areas. In general, as we were able to model, we really do hope that these changes are going to lead to greater utilization of the bonuses and help improve feasibility in the long run. And as a result, we'll be seeing more of our needed unit types, hopefully including more affordable, larger, and accessible units. Before I invite Abby up, I do want to talk a little bit about how we got from our code concept to the proposals before you today. Just really high level, some of the engagement that we've done so far. So staff utilized feedback received during the engagement, both to develop the proposals as well as to revise between discussion and proposed draft. In addition to the engagement that we did for the housing production strategy, early in the project, staff conducted interviews with about 25 different development professionals. This included developers, architects, but also advocates, which led to that focus of expanding bonuses from just the floor area ratio to include height and coverage bonuses as well. We also held online info sessions, published our map app for comments, met with community groups, held cross-bureau meetings with our bureau partners that led to further refinement. And then additionally, we also worked with Abby to conduct interviews with individuals with disabilities. Those interviews specifically, I did want to point out, helped us develop the ground floor accessible unit floor area exemption that Morgan mentioned, because we heard a lot about wanting more ground floor accessible units available. And then these are just some highlights from the comments submitted to staff during the discussion draft phase. Largely, we saw support with encouragement to simplify code where possible, refine different coverage levels, the level of incentives, step down exemptions, and additional recommendations that might be a bit outside the scope of this project. And then lastly, we heard just affirmation that as the city continues to work on refining and improving the zoning code to get needed housing, it's just one of the many levers that the city should be pulling. And then I'm going to transition my slide and invite Abby Griffith to join us at the front. A little bit more, and then there's a chair. Almost ready.
Hi everyone, my name is Abby Griffith and I am first year Masters of Urban and Regional Planning student at Portland State University. And I worked this year with Ariel and Tom to do engagement to support the project before you today. I'll share some highlights of this project with you. Next slide, please. Finding type A mobility accessible units is like finding a needle in a haystack. I want to start with this quote because it summarizes what I heard from many participants. People spend months or even years looking for accessible housing, and when they find accessible housing, they end up at least modifying one or two things, even if it's accessible. Next slide, please. These are QR code for all participants' story. I interviewed 9 community members and turned each interview into short story. This QR code links to the 4 participants' story, and I hope you can get a chance to read people's story and learn more about this. Each person experience is different, but together they show common barrier that people with disability face. Next slide, please. These are key takeaways I pulled out of the interview, and I'm going to go through the list. Policy do not always match what people actually need. Not enough accessible housing is being built, and many units labeled as accessible do not meet the needs of the uh, people who live in them. Next, universal design makes housing more usable for everyone and would help to solve this issue. Safety is often overlooked, especially during emergency. For example, some participants shared that um, they felt isolated and abandoned in apartment stairwell when fire alarm went off. Um, Accessibility and affordabilities are connected. As you can imagine, people with disability are in fixed income, and if they have to modify um, their housing with limited income, that is really hard. Even if they are able to find accessible home, home that is accessible, still sidewalks, uh, transit, and the nearby businesses may not be accessible. Um, Finally, making changes to a home is expensive and difficult. Next slide, please. This is participant's story. Um, Alan. Alan is a wheelchair user, and he shared that he had to flow into bathroom because the doorway were too narrow. This story, um, this shows how poor the design can affect someone's daily life in independence. Also, JJ shared that despite living in 4 different states, we have never found completely accessible housing or lived in them. This story showed that accessibility is a challenge in Portland, but also across the country. Next slide, please. Uh, this is also participant's story, Kasi. Kasi explained that the supply of accessible housing is very low and poorly advertised. Many people do not know where to look for accessible housing, and it's really hard to find where to find accessible housing. It would be helpful to make like accessible housing registry list or a website that makes it easier for people with disability to find accessible housing. As you can see, Kathy shared 2 pictures. So one picture that is actually one unit that when I interviewed Kathy, um, she shared with us, which is not accessible. And the second one is accessible. She moved in after I interviewed her, and that is accessible building, accessible unit, but um, she has to pay from her pocket to add the grab bar in the bathroom, even it's supposed to be accessible, but not that accessible. Next slide, please. Joseph also wheelchair user, and Joseph shared that his bathroom was not accessible, and because of that, his wife has to carry him between bathroom and the bedrooms. This shows that inaccessible housing doesn't only affect only disabled people, but it also affects family and the caregivers. Next slide, please. These are a call to action for developers and policymakers. Based on this interview, I have 5 recommendations. One, build more type A accessible units, more than your minimum requirement, please. 2, ensure strong accountability so that accessibility requirements are being followed. 3, use universal design whenever possible, please, so that many people can live comfortably. 4, people with disability should be included throughout the design process because they are experts in their lived experience. 5, accessibility should be the standards instead of exception in new buildings, especially new development. Next slide, please. This is my personal reflection and closing. Working on this project was very emotional for me as totally blind person. I can relate to many of these challenges. It was very hard on me to work on this because I really don't like hearing about Alan's story that he has to crawl into the bathroom because doorway was not accessible for him. I don't like hearing about JJ's story that he got stuck almost 45 minutes on the stairwell, hoping people come and they rescue him. Everybody who can use the stairs got out of the building, but JJ, who used a wheelchair, nobody people forgot about him and he got stuck on the stairs for 45 minutes. That story breaks my heart. I also don't like any of Joseph's story. Like it was really hard on me. Right after interview, there's sometimes I cry and I couldn't stop myself. In closing, accessibility is about dignity, safety, and full participation in communities' life. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Abby, for joining us. I'm going to do a bit of an unceremonious transition back to our item. Flipping between 2 PowerPoints is not as easy as I thought it would be. Just a moment. Hopefully that works for us. Great. We're just coming to the end of our time with you all. I just wanted to cover next steps for the project. Right now, this is our Planning Commission hearing. We will be spending a little bit more time with you all. We've had the MAP app testimony period open for about a month and a half, And today's briefing and hearing, we will hear some verbal testimony, and then the next 2 sessions we will have with you will be work sessions, hopefully leading to a recommendation and our time to begin with City Council. And that's all I have for you today.
Okay.
We can take any questions you may have about the basics of the proposal, or you can proceed to the oral testimony, and we can come back after you've heard all of that.
Sweet. How about if we start with, and thank you to all who shared on this briefing. It was really informative and well, I thought, really well articulated. Are there any questions for clarification before we go to public testimony? Yeah, Mr. Spivak.
Thank you. It's not actually clarification. I forgot I should have disclosed. I own 2 CM2 sites in Northeast Portland. Neither of them with development plans right now.
Thank you. Questions for clarification? Okay. Well, Tom, Ariel, Abby, Morgan, please feel blessed and released, but do not go far. Thank you. And now, thanks to everyone. We're going to go to our public hearing now. Thank you all for your patience through the briefing and for your willingness to share your thoughts with us today. If you have not signed up yet to testify and are here in person, you can still testify by filling out a paper sign-up sheet available at the side table and give it to Autumn, our commission clerk. In order to hear from everyone, this is standard boilerplate. The commission would appreciate everyone's cooperation in preserving order. Disruptive conduct, such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or commission deliberations will not be allowed. I will call testifiers in the order of registration, which was emailed to all testifiers last night. And please have your testimony address the proposal before this commission, which is the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. If you are a lobbyist, please identify the organization you represent. Virtual testifiers should unmute themselves when I call your name, please. And testifiers will be limited to 3 minutes of testimony. So thank you again. And we look forward to hearing from you. And our first, we have Michael, the first 3, and then I'll call the ones on deck. You ready? Michael Anderson, joining us online, Fisher Jemison, and Luke Norman. And after that, on deck, we have Madison Moskowitz, Rob Hemphill, and Jesse Rollins. So, Michael Anderson. Now that we see you. And Fisher, definitely see Luke. Okay, how about, Luke, why don't you kick us off and we'll hope to hear from Michael and Fisher in the moments ahead. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, thanks everyone. My name is Luke Norman. I appreciate the time of the Planning Commission, the chair, the vice chairs, and all the commissioners here. I appreciate staff's effort to improve the effectiveness of the bonuses. I think they showed some pretty compelling work, how the bonuses hadn't been working, and some good ideas to improve their effectiveness in the future. I also support the Portland Neighbors Welcome for refinements that they've shared on this project. It will help the city coming to compliance with some upcoming state requirements, and will also make some improvements to the base zone that will make all the bonuses work better. So there's some easy changes here to just help the staff's work go a little further. So today I'd like to focus my testimony on refinement number 4 that Portland Neighbors Welcome has shared, which is to reduce the open space mandate. Unfortunately, on small sites, open spaces can often These outdoor area requirements can often become a de facto balcony requirement since there isn't physical space to fit the open space otherwise on this site. This is a unfortunate challenge because these small sites and these neighborhood apartments are the projects that right now are most likely to pencil and are the type of smaller apartment buildings we'd like to see going into our neighborhoods. So by requiring these balconies, we do two things. We, one, make it harder to build on small sites. We also require builders to oversupply something that the market and renters may not want. So we're required to give them balconies where renters may want more living room area, more closet space, or just cheaper rent. That's the impact of the requirement. And then I just shared a couple examples from my neighborhood in Northwest Portland. You'll see a couple photos on the front and some bigger photos on the back. There's a really small stretch of RM3 on Northwest Pettygrove. As staff mentioned, we don't have a lot of RM3s. This is just slid in there. These are new buildings that have gone up. One of the buildings there, I believe the one that's the Pettygrove is a new building, and it replaced a single family home there. So we went from one home to about 20 apartments, which is great, especially in an area like Northwest where there's transit, grocery stores, all those pieces. Unfortunately, you can see the impact of these requiring developers to build balconies, that we get too much of something that people don't necessarily want. And so there's a number of unused and underutilized balconies. So balconies are great, but they're not something that everyone wants. So I encourage the Planning Commission to look to the city's previous efforts in the 2024 Housing Regulatory Relief Package, where they looked at what are some things that are goods but not requirements. One of those was active ground floor uses, and that's something that they continue to allow but no longer require. So in a similar way, I think Portland should continue to allow open spaces to be built, allow balconies. If people want them and developers specialize them, there can be a market, but we shouldn't require them because that can make it harder to build on these types of sites. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Luke. I see Michael Anderson online.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Rouse. Members of the Commission, my name is Michael Anderson. I'm Director of Cities and Towns at Sightline Institute. Sightline supports all the great work so far on the bonus alignment project and the direction of the proposed draft. I'm also here to support the 4 tweaks suggested in the Portland Neighbors Welcome written testimony and to offer some context for some of the testimony you'll be hearing tonight in support of 2 of them. Specifically, I'm speaking about the 2 minor changes that would save the city future time and trouble by bringing one of the zones, RM3, up to the standards of the statewide multifamily model zoning code. That is, the 2 changes are like to bump the base FAR from 2 to 2.5 and to shorten the front setback to 5 feet on all RM3 lots. First, what is RM3? As Luke and Ariel mentioned, it's currently one of the least used zones in the city. It covers 0.7% of residential and mixed-use land. It allows 3 to 4 story apartment buildings, taller with bonuses. Our suggested tweaks would not change that. Next, what is the multifamily model code? This is a set of best practices for neighborhood scale apartment and condo buildings that was approved by the state LCDC in December, after work on HVAP was already underway. It isn't directly binding on Portland today, but under the terms of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rules approved also in December, it can essentially become binding on a large share of multifamily land if a city is underperforming its peer cities on housing production. That's relevant because Portland's Day of Reckoning is coming next year. There are also other scenarios where Portland might find itself required to promptly meet the model zoning code's minimum standards. There's a possible bill under development in the legislature that would apply the model code near transit. Another set of rules up for debate at LCDC tomorrow would potentially order the city to greenlight a building if it fits within the state model code and has had its building plan accepted by the state. There are lots of scenarios. We're suggesting that the city make these simple changes right now to make RM3 its simple tool for complying with any future state mandates. If that happens, all the bonuses you're improving in this project would automatically follow. This suggestion is not just about saving future staff time, paperwork, political complication while maximizing the use of these bonuses. If you want these zones to be used by builders, it's just a good idea to line up with state-endorsed best practices for multifamily zoning that will presumably be a common standard across cities across Oregon. By defining these statewide model zoning codes, Oregon's learning from the huge housing production success of Japan and New Zealand, countries that have already standardized their zoning across large areas and seen home building continue even in the face of falling prices. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Luke. Next, I see Madison Moskowitz online and Rob Hemphill and Jesse Rollins. Oh, wait, Fisher. Sorry, we see you. Sorry. Take it away, Fisher.
Hey, thank you, Chair Routh and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Fisher Jemison, and I'm testifying today in support of Portland Neighbors Welcome's suggested amendments to the Housing Bonus Alignment Project. I'm a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome and also a proud Inner Southeast infill housing resident. And some other folks here are going to cover the technical details a little better, so I was just hoping to bring some apartment positivity. When I moved most recently, I went from living in an apartment building on Division to a backyard ADU because I wanted to live on a quieter side street. And I really like my ADU, but there's a lot to miss about apartments. You get better privacy, you get better energy efficiency. I think my power bill like doubled when I moved to a detached building. The unit layouts can use space more efficiently without having any stairs inside. And my personal favorite is that the upper floors of new construction buildings don't really have spiders in them. And so one of my biggest personal draws to Portland Neighbors Welcome's Inner East Side for All campaign was imagining if we didn't have to make that choice, if you could have apartments on these great side streets away from traffic and noise and get kind of all those benefits at once. So it's really concerning to me to hear from developers that our mid-rise base zones aren't really usable for building on the small lots that we find in those areas. This is an issue that we see undermining zoning reforms in other cities routinely, and it's happened plenty of times here as well, like with our sixplex bonus in low density zones that's essentially never used. Fortunately, BPS has a really solid proposal, and Portland Neighbors Welcome also has a really solid list of reasonable and evidence-based recommendations here that would prevent those issues from hurting our base zones and hurting the Inner East Side zoning plan. And I hope you'll consider adopting them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fisher. And Madison, thank you for your patience. Please proceed at your convenience.
Thank you so much, Chair Routh and members of the Commission. My name is Madison Moskowitz, and I'm testifying on behalf of Reach Community Development, which is one of Portland's largest and oldest nonprofit affordable housing developers. We are close to opening 73 Foster, which is not covered by this proposal, but still family-sized units in a transit-rich area. So Reach is excited about the bonus alignment project to let us build more high-quality housing in more places at greater scale. And bringing the CM zone bonuses into alignment with RM makes a big difference in our project pipeline. Reach strongly supports the deeper affordability bonus. It'll help us build a greater number of affordable homes with that deep affordability for folks with the lowest incomes. Those are the Portlanders most in need of stable housing. So this proposal will help us pencil out more of those homes. The accessible housing bonus is also pretty exciting. Reach serves Portlanders who are older, who have greater accessibility needs and mobility disabilities every day. And as the great presentation from the BPS intern demonstrated earlier, these folks are chronically underserved by our existing housing stock. And as Portland and Oregon as a whole ages, our housing supply needs to adjust. So this bonus will help us make that happen. To the greatest extent possible, please make the proposed benefits under the project universal. Complex application of these provisions makes planning and design a game of chutes and ladders. And a simple, consistent approach will improve developers' consistency and efficiency, and the city and your efficiency as well, which is really necessary in what we all acknowledge as a housing crisis. For example, please apply the proposed front setback reduction universally, and please maintain heightened step-down requirements consistently. REACH, we think, can deliver more affordable homes for Portlanders under the Housing Bonus Alignment Project, but we don't want to wait on, all love to bureaucracy, but please, we urge you to advance the proposal with urgency. Thank you so much for your work to create an affordable and inclusive future for our city, and thanks to Portland Neighbors Welcome for helping make some of this testimony happen.
Thank you, Madison. Robert.
Chair Routh, Vice Chair Spevak, and Vice Chair Pollock, and other commission members. My name is Rob Hemphill, and first I do need to disclose that I am a city employee, but I am here today in my private citizen capacity. I'm overall in support of the Housing Bonus Alignment Project and really appreciate the work staff has done. And just to acknowledge that most of our testimony isn't about the bonus.
It's finicky.
Okay. We like what they're doing there. But we do have those proposed changes that you've been hearing about. And like Fisher, I just want to focus on the broader ideas of why we want them. And so, in addition to complying with state model code and increasing the value of the bonuses, these changes make RM3 a more useful zoning designation in its most basic form. We all know that the current housing development environment isn't working. And while the changes to RM3 are more likely to work, we've also heard on our side from developers that they make RM3 only likely to work if the developer pursues the bonuses. And to me, that is a misapplication of the purpose of zoning and bonuses. In my opinion, the base zone should work, and we should have bonuses to encourage the additional things we value, such as accessibility and affordability and family units. So that's why continually improving the base zone is just as important as offering meaningful bonuses. Looking to the future of zoning in Portland, there are efforts to move away from the problematic corridor zoning that we currently utilize, which puts renters on the most polluted, noisiest, and highest traffic violence streets. I lived in one of those apartments on Burnside, which had cars crash into the building twice in 4 years. As we look to the future, RM3 is a potential zone that we could apply to areas where we want to rezone, and having that functional base zone is critical to success, especially if we can apply it to the high land cost neighborhoods where residential infill project housing doesn't pencil. By adopting these 4 refinements, the Planning Commission can ensure that HBAP not only aligns our bonuses, but also sets RM3 to be a viable base zone by itself to hopefully spur new housing production at a time when it's desperately needed. Thank you for your time and for volunteering to better our city.
Thank you, Rob. Twice?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Jesse.
Thank you. Good evening, Commission members. My name is Jesse Rollins, and I'm here representing Portland Neighbors Welcome. Portland Neighbors Welcome is a member-led organization that is dedicated to ensuring that everyone who lives and wants to live in Portland can keep and find a home that they can afford. Through our mission, we advocate for land use policies that will make Portland a more fair, vibrant, and sustainable city. We appreciate the work of BPS that have put forth a commendable draft proposal for HBAP, and we support their draft proposal, and we recommend 4 additional refinements to maximize these efforts in reaching the project goals. Our first 2 recommendations, as y'all have heard tonight, are to ensure that the HBAP can align with future state code. First, we request that the zone floor area ratio be increased from 2.0 to 2.5. Second, we recommend reducing the front setbacks to 5 feet in the base zone instead of only in the case of non-inclusionary zoning bonuses. Again, these will align with future state code and will save the city staff time and resources on making these adjustments now instead of later. We're also making recommendations to make sure the HBAP bonuses are easier to use. Our third refinement is eliminating mandatory step-downs to maximize the utility of density bonuses. That will improve building capacity and decrease building cost. Lastly, we recommend reducing open space mandates on all lots. As y'all have heard tonight, in reality, these mandates can frequently become balcony requirements that decrease real living spaces. For a full description of these 4 refinements, y'all can look at our public comment letter that we submitted. And on behalf of Portland Neighbors Welcome, we do appreciate the opportunity to share our support for the HBAP proposal with these 4 refinements. By adding these recommendations, the opportunity to add more affordable and accessible units will be maximized through this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Madison, Rob, Jesse, thank you very much. Up next, Ian Crozier and Maisie Miller, and then our last few, Jackie Haddon and Jasmine Stoner.
Thank
you very much, Ian.
Hi. Great. Well, thank you all for the opportunity to comment. Thank you to staff for the excellent presentation. My name is Ian Crozier. I'm a member of Portland Neighbors Welcome. I'm a resident of the Inner East Side, and I work as an urban planner as well. I am here to encourage you to pursue and pass the increased bonuses that have been studied through this project. I also strongly recommend the refinements to the base zone that have been proposed by Portland Neighbors Welcome. It's really important to set up the zone for success when we're adding these bonuses for really good things, for housing affordability and accessibility and other things that we want to encourage. We want to make sure the zone is working properly for those outcomes. Among the recommendations we've put forward is reducing that front setback down to 5 feet. Setbacks are like kryptonite for small lots. Many lots that are zoned for RM3 are small, and if that zone is expanded, that will surely be the case in more places. A 10-foot setback is requiring a front yard for apartment buildings in what is one of our highest density zones in the city, and it's just not appropriate. I live in the Inner East Side. I was riding my bike home and I saw a brand new single family house, or a brand new, I should say, maybe a middle housing project in a R5 zone. And it came almost right up to the street, and I was shocked. And I learned that there's a front setback averaging rule that applies in the R zones, that we allow buildings to come up close to the street if their neighboring buildings do as well. But that's not something that we extend to the RM zones. So at the very least, we should have some added flexibility there on the front setback. I also wanted to comment on the mandatory height step down that is required for RM lots that are adjacent to R zone lots, basically to those lower density lots. We want these bonuses to work, that was going to allow taller buildings. But if you are required to make one side of your lot scrunched down and smaller, that reduces the utility of the bonus. It may require more expensive construction. It may increase the number of corners and awkward spaces in your building design, which increases the likelihood of defects and failure over the long term. It also says, if you've got a lot, we've got 2 sides to it. One lot maybe next to a freeway, maybe next to an industrial area, maybe next to a busy commercial corridor, and we have another side that's quieter and more peaceful. Which side of that lot is more appropriate to be putting homes? Or maybe, and currently what our zoning code says is that we should put most of those homes away from the quieter area and close to the potential hazards. So thank you.
That's amazing. And Ian, I believe you had Luke at Kryptonite. Maisie, please.
Is this working? Okay, cool. My name is Maisie Miller, and I support and love the Housing Bonus Alignment Project's goal to increase the effectiveness of bonuses. I also support all 4 of Portland Neighbors Welcome's refinements to make this project even better. I'm here to talk about refinement 4 specifically, reduction or elimination of open space mandates. Open space mandates often become de facto balcony mandates in smaller lots. Balconies often cost more to build than the equivalent amount of indoor square footage. This makes new apartments slightly less affordable, As a rather poor college student, I experienced firsthand how much of a difference even a few less dollars a month makes in expenses. I also know many who struggle to find affordable housing units. Luckily, this deeper affordability bonus will help to increase the supply. Because open space mandates increase the complexity and cost of building, they represent a barrier to an affordable project penciling. It's also often more expensive to make units Type A accessible. Removal of open space requirements can help to make more of those projects pencil too. I find the lack of a balcony or privatized open space to not matter to me. I choose to live in an urban environment because the city is my playground. The park's in my yard and the hills are my balcony. I know that some love their balcony, but others like me don't care for them. I would love if some changes were made to allow for more choice when it comes to housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Awesome. Ian Maisie, thank you so much. And our last two, Jackie Haddon and Jasmine Stoner. Is there a Jasmine in the house? Okay, Jackie, you're back.
I'm back. Good evening, Commissioners. I was here in June speaking to you. To remind you, I'm the co-founder of Livable Homes. We specialize in accessible housing education, certification, and consultation. I'm a Universal Design Certified Professional and an active realtor in Portland, Oregon. So that's where I speak from. I'm here today in support of the Housing Bonus Alignment Project and to ask you to make recommendations to add to this to make it work. Portland has a documented accessible housing crisis. In repeated market reports run by us, only about 6% of homes listed in the regional multiple listing service identify any accessible entrance at all. Of those, only 2% show a true zero-step threshold, the bare minimum for wheelchair access. At the same time, 23% of Portland households have at least one member with a disability. 35% of residents over 65 have a member of the household with a disability, and 57% of all fair housing complaints nationally cite disability. This is not a policy gap. Oregon already requires the International Code Type A and Type B accessible design standards in the covered multifamily housing. The gap is a knowledge gap. Most builders and developers cannot accurately describe what those standards require, which projects trigger them, or what they truly cost to incorporate. For most residential builders and developers, when they think accessibility, they think ADA. Here's what builders need to understand. The economics of accessible design are compelling if someone shows the data. So this example focuses on home ownership in detached homes. We track almost 4,000 new construction homes built after 2020. Homes with a main level bedroom and full bathroom sell for an average of 9% more, command about 13% higher price per square foot, and spend about 15% fewer days on market. On a $500,000 unit, that 9% premium is $45,000 in added value. Incorporating Type A and Type B features at the design stage cost about 2 to 4% maybe of construction, roughly $10,000 to $20,000. The return on that investment is 2 to 1 before you account for faster absorption. The same features added after construction can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $80,000 per unit or more. So the math is not even close. The barrier is not cost, it's the absence of education. For rentals, more accessible units means a broader availability for a broader range of need. It's a win-win on either side. Despite the clear need, there is no funded, systematic program currently existing to educate Oregon's builders and developers on Type A/B standards and accessible design economics. The Housing Bonus Alignment Project's incentives are sitting on top of this knowledge gap, and they will underperform until that knowledge gap is closed. The Oregon Legislature has already provided a potential funding mechanism that I talked about before in June. House Bill 3589 appropriates $500,000 through OHCS for technical assistance, explicitly including training programs that help housing developments meet physical accessibility standards. Builder and developer education is a direct eligible use of these funds. I asked the Commission to include 4 additional recommendations in the Housing Bonus Alignment. First, establish builder and developer education on ICC Type A/B standards as a required component of the incentive framework, not an optional add-on. The density bonus alone will not move the market without it.
Okay. Quickly.
Yeah. I recommend that we use that technical assistance funding and that any developer receiving a density bonus needs to complete a verified education program and require that any units need to be verified by a qualified third-party certifier and documented in the accessible housing inventory. This I think will make the Portland Middle Housing crisis, the Portland Middle Housing truly accessible for the benefit of all of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Last call for Jasmine. Oh, great. Sorry, I get very excited. Okay, and while we're waiting for Jasmine, if there is anyone else who is here in this room, who would like to share oral comment, now is your chance. I see some elbow jostling. Okay, Jasmine, please, at your leisure.
Oh, if somebody else had something to say first, please do.
It's all
Sorry, I
you.
was just kidding. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. Hi, my name is Jasmine Stoner, and I am here representing Mill Park Neighborhood Association. I'm the vice chair of their neighborhood association, but I'm also mostly here representing myself and my small community. I did have some visuals that I wanted to bring with me. Unfortunately, I was not able to do that because I had a prior commitment. I have a couple of concerns when it comes to the Affordable Housing Opportunities Project. I know that's not what we're speaking about, but my concern is that lack of oversight and lack of checks and balances when it comes to building affordable homes seems to be a problem. I'm not exactly sure who is in charge. I know the planning department is supposed to oversee these things. When builders get incentives in order to build, So who checks and oversees that they really provide the provisions in which they receive the zoning incentives for, such as when they increase density in a zoning area and they are supposed to provide certain elements that deter crime, such as peepholes or windows that you can see through in their front doors, or elements such as fences that people cannot hide behind. There are things like that that I know builders have had density increase incentives. I didn't say that right, but in order to provide certain crime prevention through environmental design features. And I know those aren't always provided to the communities in which they were supposed to be. For example, a community was zoned for 25 homes and they were able to build 31 homes because they were given these, they signed into a covenant about crime control prevention strategies. However, those strategies were not implemented in the community. So that is a concern to me, especially when we're talking about lower income communities where they have less disposable income in order to provide those crime prevention measures on their own. Also, when you increase density in a zone, you're going to have more crime. So it's very important that you do actually provide the incentives in which you received your bonuses for. And my concern is that if there's going to be an increased production in affordable housing, my concern is that they're going to be built to a lesser standard. And just because they're built for lower income individuals does not mean that they should be built to a lesser standard. I saw the timer. Oh. I had a couple of visuals. For example, a bonus was given for having peepholes in the doors, and they said that they provided windows in the front doors. However, the windows are frosted. You cannot see out. It actually provides more of a barrier to security because you can't see who's outside, and whoever's outside could actually get into you easier. And the reason that I'm very familiar with this is because I live in one of these communities. And I've now gone through and seen a lot of the things that we were supposed to be provided, and we have not been provided those things. And it is very concerning to me because now I'm trying to figure out how to keep my community safe. And it was already supposed to be built safe in the first place. So I think my concern is perhaps the checks and balances and who oversees. And also maybe we need special permitters that are knowledgeable in the affordable housing covenants and incentives that the individual projects have received. Does that, I don't know if that makes sense. I'm so sorry. I will get better at this, but thank you so much for letting me continue.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And I believe Mill Park is going to do a free-for-all in the park on August 7th. So we hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Last call.
Wait.
Oh, yes.
If I just may say, yes, we have Minecraft movie in the park, and we've also turned it into a bike safety event. Portland Bureau of Transportation has donated over 100 helmets, and we have a decoration station for the children that will be attending, because we really want to try to reduce any barriers to safety equipment possible. So we're also looking for more donors. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that log roll. Okay, last call. Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Jackie. Last call. Going once, going twice. Closed. Both oral and written testimony. And thank you all for your input. And to my colleagues, we did have some late breaking written testimony on the MAP app just this afternoon. So making sure that we all see that before our next work session. In past, we have gone into kind of round robin of what we're thinking, anything that we heard or main questions that we have. If anyone would like to do so, and it is not a requirement. Commissioner Knowles, please.
I think that I saw a letter from some of the city councilors on this subject.
Yes.
But I looked at it quickly. I think it arrived today, or maybe I just missed the email.
Yeah, it was last night.
I'm wondering if we have copies of that anywhere.
It is on the map app. That is a great question. So councilors Avalos, Koyama Lane, and Green submitted a letter to us, and that is both in the map app and was emailed.
Yeah, sorry, I was.
To folks. No.
I was looking at the map app and I didn't see it. Thank you.
No, but it's good. Great. Thank you. Other thoughts? Vice Chair Spivak.
Thank you. A couple thoughts. One is I've also been sort of studying balconies as I go by them, and I sometimes see bikes stored, sometimes furniture, but I've not yet seen a person on one yet. I don't think it happens very often, so that was, I guess, some testimony along those lines. One thing not mentioned by testimony, but I stuck out to me is mass timber incentive, which I would want to have a reason for an incentive more than because Portland's a leader in it. I think that mass timber is an interesting idea, and it can reduce the carbon footprint of a building if it's substituting for concrete, which starts at 8 stories or higher. But at lower scale wood frame construction, it's more expensive, takes just as long, and it's got more pulp in it, so it's got a bigger carbon footprint and a bigger foundation to hold it. So I think we should caution our enthusiasm for that through an incentive. And lastly, on accessibility, I wonder whether we should, if staff's got any help to, maybe we bump that one up a little bit, or have 2 tiers of accessible. It's just an idea from the testimony, because it's getting 5 points, 5 feet of height, which in some situations probably doesn't get you a floor. So anyway, I'd be curious about if there's some way to provide more incentive there. And actually, there's a bit of information I don't know that staff might know, or someone else in the room, is I know that accessibility is a one-way protected class in Oregon, meaning that you can preference someone who has a disability for a unit, but you cannot discriminate against somebody with a disability. But I imagine that there are some accessible units where the person living in it doesn't need the accessibility. It's just the unit became available and was rented to them. So I'm kind of curious how that dynamic factors in to the people who really need the homes being able to get to them. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I'm curious about this is Councilor. Commissioner Alvarado for the record. Just thinking about bike parking and the changes in requirement there and the impact, the current usability of those, and having change in impacts will result in less bike parking and less people being able to store bikes. I know, especially in e-bikes, that's become a big issue of like people not having a place to put these. And so I'm just curious what the impact will be.
Thank you. Commissioner Thompson.
Yeah, I haven't read all of the most recent testimony, but it seems like we heard a fair amount of consensus around some of the opportunities to just further refine this and go a little bit further. And so for my part, I'm interested in exploring those topics that were touched on today by many in the room. And I guess a question or point of clarification for me is just the definition of large units or family-sized units. I may have misunderstood the slide that was presented showing projected increase in demand by number of bedrooms, and it showed studios and one bedrooms, and then the two bedroom was like 1%, but that's also connected to, yes, please come up. That's also connected to some of the bonuses that we're unlocking, and so the connection there didn't totally make sense to me.
Sure. Yeah, Ariel Kane, Economic Planner, BPS. My government-issued computer died, so I can't bring the slide up. But that slide that you're referring to is showing historical development trends. So we've had an excess of studios and one bedrooms and a significant less proportion of two or more bedrooms. And so previously we'd had just a 3-bedroom bonus, but because we're seeing such a small increase in 2-bedroom bonuses, we've increased the, we're not calling it large units or family-sized units per se, because what is a family? But there is, the multiple bedroom bonus now includes 2 or more bedrooms as a part of the bonus.
Okay, I'm so glad I asked the question. Is the actual presentation posted to the MAP app, or is it possible to do so? Yeah.
Per usual, the PowerPoints will be linked to the event on the Planning Commission website, and I can also email it out to commissioners following the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles.
I will be curious about the 4 ideas that were mentioned that there seems to be, at least in the testimony, some consensus about why those weren't incorporated in the staff recommendation. Because I suspect that they came up during the conversations. So when we get back together, I'd be interested in hearing about that.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Vice Chair Pollack.
I'm also very interested in the 4 things that have been consistently brought up in testimony, and seems that there's consensus. Particularly, I'm pretty interested in eliminating the mandatory step down and the conversation around reducing what is an open space requirement on those smaller RM lots. I'm also very curious, as testimony brought up, if it's part of within the purveyance of the project, why we shouldn't be getting ahead of the game in terms of state rules that could be imposed on us, and trying to get ahead to make these good fixes. So that's where I'm really interested to have conversation on.
Great, thank you. Yeah, Commissioner O'Meara.
Commissioner O'Meara, for the record, I would like to discuss the deeper affordability incentive a bit further. We have the greatest need for 0 to 30% AMI units, but affordability, I believe, is defined as 80% and below universally. So would like to discuss further if there's any opportunity to greatly incentivize the 0 to 30%. Thank you.
James, did you have something? Okay, great. All right, thank you all so much. Thanks to everyone who submitted testimony. Thank you to staff so much for laboring on this. And we will be continuing this on August 25th, so watch this space. We'll now, are we good to go straight in? Do we need a few minutes to wiggle? We good? Okay. Goodbye, Commissioner Alvarado. We miss you already. We'll shift focus now to our design review reform report. This is an informal presentation. Thank you see Ryan Singer, Brandon Spencer Hartle coming before us. Thank you very much. This is informational presentation outlines options to streamline design review while supporting urban design and historic goals. So thank you both for being here. Take us wherever you would like.
Sure. I'll go ahead and get started.
you have the presentation on,
It's been about a year since I've been here, Commissioner. So for those of you who I don't know, Brandon Spencer Hartle, he, him pronouns. For the last 10 or so years, I've served as the city's Historic Resources Program Manager, Senior Planner here at BPS.
I'm Ryan Singer. I'm the Principal Planner for Long Range Planning and Urban Design, and I supervised this work.
Autumn, would you give me screen sharing permissions?
Takes a moment. You'll be good.
Okay, great. Well, good evening, Commissioners. We're here tonight to talk about a recently completed report on the city's design regulations that was directed by the City Council back in the fall or early winter. We'll go through these 5 topic areas tonight. Ryan and I will co-present, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. Where we're at tonight, just so to wayfind in this conversation, it will become a much larger policy conversation in the months ahead, is just to establish for tonight, the Planning Commission's role is to be interested, to give staff the opportunity to brief you on work that the City Council has now become aware of. And for today, no Planning Commission action is being requested. That said, zoning code amendments related to some of the reform concepts we'll talk about tonight are on the horizon and likely to come to you at a future date, likely in September. So for tonight, this is just a briefing, and then this will evolve into zoning code amendments that have not yet been published. So Ryan, I'll let you go with the first few slides. I'll take it after that.
Sure. So the purpose of the report and the approach, the council resolution, which was passed in the fall of 2025, directed us to study the existing design regulations, RD overlay, and they also it includes, there's a set of standards, and then there's also a set of approval criteria, which are different in the central city and outside the central city. They also asked us to analyze recent and then some projected economic impacts from design review and any sort of regulatory reforms we might make. And so we also did some identifying of regulatory reform concepts, and we put them sort of in some packages that Brandon will discuss. Go ahead. We had, it was initially 120 days. I think we got an extra 10 days to do some additional work on this that we delivered in the timeline. And this was a collaboration between BPS and Portland Permitting and Development on the content. Portland Permitting and Development is really, they administer the design overlay regulations and the design review criteria, and also manage the design commission. We did an evaluation of recent design review cases in each of the city council districts, and so there's little case studies in the report that talk about recent design review cases. And then we also analyze sort of recent permit trends in the land use review data. And this was primarily focused on the design overlay zone, although it does, I think, speak to a broader story of development in Portland. And then, so we did some listening sessions. We talked to the Design Commission. We talked to the Historic Landmarks Commission. And then we also did some briefing with the Development Review Advisory Committee, or DRAC as it's sometimes known. And then we also did some select interviews with people in the development industry and their representatives. So both people who sort of make the buildings happen in terms of financing and constructing them, and then also as the architects. We didn't do broader inclusive engagement. This wasn't a legislative land use process, but future code changes that may come out of this would require more input, and so those would go through a more rigorous engagement process. And then the report was transmitted to City Council, and it's available on our webpage.
Thanks, Ryan. Many of you, or several of you, had the patience to join us for our comprehensive plan trainings a couple of years ago. And one of those trainings walked through how our city design regulations work, which are primarily in chapters 3 and 4 of the comp plan. I won't go to that level of detail tonight, but we did think it'd be beneficial for the full commission to get a little grounding in how our design regulations operate, where they are in the code, and the different facets that we looked at in the report. When council gave us this assignment to spend 4 months thinking about design and historic regulations in the city and to bring back reform concepts that they could consider for long-term policy change, one of the opportunities was to really think about where do those design regulations apply, and the direction from council was to look at the design overlay zone, which is shown on this map in shades of purple, and the historic resource overlay zone, which is shown in this map in shades of blue. Those two areas are overlay zones in the 400s chapter of the zoning code. They apply design-related regulations for two different purposes. One, in the design overlay zone, to accommodate generally larger scale new development in the areas of the city that allow it the most. And two, in our historic resource overlay zone, as a measure to ensure historic physical features from historic resources are retained and that new development has a relationship with existing historic development in places like historic districts. So I'm going to talk about these two zones, first the design overlay zone and then the historic overlay zone. And I can come back to this map at any time if people would like me to. So for those who aren't terribly familiar, I know some of you are, the design overlay zone applies to about 7.5% of the city land area and was first implemented downtown in 1959. Its first application downtown was largely a product of the AIA and other interested historic preservation architecture advocates looking at a downtown that was changing in a direction that looked more auto-oriented and less pedestrian. And so the first application of the overlay zone in a small section of downtown was really intended to reverse that or to correct that trend of sort of blank walls and auto-orientation and loss of the public realm. Over the years following 1959, the design overlay zone was expanded to larger areas of the downtown and eventually expanded to the entire downtown area. And now many of our centers and corridors that allow for development that is approximately 5 or more stories of building allowance. This would be places like the CM3 zone, the RM3 and RM4 zone, and then the central city more urban zones, the CX, RX type zones. Generally speaking, the design overlay zone does not apply to single dwelling zones or low density multi-dwelling zones. That change was made, well, the philosophy had always been there not to apply it to the low density zones, but where it was applied, that was largely repealed 5 years ago in the design overlay zone amendments project. According to the code, the design overlay zone advances 3 tenets of design. Those are context responsiveness, the relationship with the public realm, and quality and resilience. And our design regulations are intended to support those 3 core tenets. In the design overlay zone, many proposals for work, such as repair and maintenance, minor exterior alterations, are exempt entirely from the regulations of the overlay zone. In areas outside of the central city, new development in the design overlay zone can elect the objective design standards, which is a prescriptive path for approval. It's not a discretionary process, so there's no public hearing. And it is really a prescriptive checklist of design standards. And then in the downtown core in the central city, and then in areas outside of the central city where the applicant would elect an alternative to the standards, we apply design review, which is a discretionary land use process that's decided either by PP&D staff. I know we have at least one of our colleagues from PP&D here in the room tonight, PP&D staff are a review body for type 1 and type 2 reviews, a staff level review. But for larger, more complex projects, the Design Commission can serve as the review body in design review. And so for those of you who want to see the flow chart, I'm going to go over this pretty briefly, but we can come back to it. Generally speaking, in the design overlay zone, that's where the design standards and design review apply. So if your property is not in the design overlay zone, there's no design review, generally speaking, and no design standards. And you really get design commission review only for those things that are in the downtown area or elect discretionary design review in the design overlay outside of downtown and are of a significant scale that trigger that commission level review. In recent years, most design reviews have been staff level reviews. Like I said, I can come back to this one, but to keep us going, we'll talk about the historic overlay zone and how it is designed in our code and our regulations to parallel some of the approaches that we use in the design overlay zone. So historic resource overlay zone applies to a smaller area of the city, about 4% of the city. City Council first adopted the regulations of this zone in 1968, and at the same time created the Historic Landmarks Commission. The historic resource overlay zone applies to historic conservation and National Register landmarks and districts. So the Paul Bunyan statue, the Pittock Mansion, the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District, Ladd's Addition Historic District, these are places that are designated historic resources. They've gone through a formal process to be evaluated for historic significance and formally adopted as designated resources. Unlike the design overlay zone, which is really intended to apply in places where significant growth is allowed and expected, the historic resource overlay zone applies in places where we are trying to implement federal, state, and local historic preservation policies. Just like the design overlay zone, there are 3 paths to approval for new development and alterations in this zone. One path is an exemption, so small exterior changes, routine repair and maintenance, interior alterations, exempt from review. In some areas, conservation districts and conservation landmarks, objective or prescriptive design standards are allowed as a path to approval. And for historic landmarks or for properties in those conservation areas that elect to do something different, what's called discretionary historic review is the path to approval. And just like we do in the design overlay zone, some of the discretionary historic reviews are reviewed and approved by staff. Those are type 1, type 1X, type 2 reviews. Most reviews are processed by staff. Those should be things like, adding a rear addition to a historic property in a historic district or a penthouse addition to a landmark downtown. And some reviews would fall into the Historic Landmarks Commission's type 3 review category, which would generally be major alterations to a historic landmark building or large new structures in a historic district. And the objective standards path here is only applied in the conservation districts. So we can come back and talk more about the details later. But in our assignment that City Council gave us, we were asked to give them a flavor of what recent regulatory changes have affected both of these zones. Some commissioners are quite familiar with these. But if you're not, about 5 years ago, both in the design overlay zone and the historic resource overlay zone, this commission recommended to council, and council adopted significant changes both to the code provisions that apply in those zones and some of the discretionary design guidelines that apply in design reviews. One was called the DOZA project, 2021, the other the Historic Resource Code project in 2022. Since then, there have been a series of projects that either significantly or indirectly affect the application of regulations in those zones, one of those being Senate Bill 1537, which is the state adjustment allowance for certain design and development standards. So in our work that we put together in the course of the last few months, working with PP&D staff, what we wanted to do is to give City Council a sort of global snapshot of what's happening citywide in the development context, and to narrow that discussion down to what's happening in the design overlay zone specifically. As this commission is probably as familiar as anyone, we've seen a steady decline in development activity citywide, and an especially sharp decline in 2025. That decline has not been limited to the design and historic overlay zones. It's been citywide, but we've seen a similar decline occur in those 2 zones as well. For the purpose of this report, we primarily looked at data for commercial or CO, commercial occupancy permits. We didn't look at trade permits. These would be things like mechanical, electrical, plumbing permits. We didn't look at small residential work, home remodels, new single dwelling structures, new duplexes. we primarily wanted to focus on the permit activity that we would expect to see in the design overlay zone, which is larger building rehabs, larger new development. And last year, 2025, 11% of the citywide commercial occupancy permits were issued in the design overlay zone. Again, the design overlay zone is about 7 or 7.5% of the city. So the data kind of look like this when you look at the last decade of this is new construction commercial permits. So that's multifamily housing. It's not a townhouse or a duplex or other commercial activity, hotel, mixed use retail. The black line at the top is permits submitted for that commercial activity outside of the design or historic overlay. In purple, you see the design overlay zone permit activity, both the design standards in the lighter purple and the design review in the darker permit purple. And then at the bottom, you see applications in historic areas, so historic review or historic standards. And with the historic review, what you see, and it's not terribly surprising, you see a low level of activity throughout the course of the 10 years, in part because we haven't anticipated zone for those places to change as dramatically as we have in the design overlay zone or some of our areas of the city that are outside of the design overlay zone. So what we've seen the last 5 years, roughly, since the design overlay zone amendments went into effect, are 447 commercial occupancy permits outside of the design overlay zone. Those resulted in just over 2,000 housing units. 110 commercial occupancy permits inside the design overlay zone. Those resulted in about 3,000 housing units. And so we still see a significant volume of our housing production happening in the design overlay zone. A couple of interesting notes, and you can dig into the report if you're curious to go deeper. Council District 4, which does include the downtown core, had the greatest percentage of multi-dwelling housing units approved through design review. 76% of new commercial multi-dwelling housing units went through a design review and were approved. Council District 3, the other side of the river, saw the lowest percentage of new multi-dwelling housing approved through design review, about a quarter of the new multi-dwelling housing approved through design review there. And so there are some geographic differences citywide of both where the zone applies and where activity has happened in recent years. And then a couple last things from the recent past. Timelines for design review have steadily decreased. In last year and in 2024, the average length of time for a project that's going through design review gets in and out of design review in 100 or fewer days. So generally speaking, the timeline for getting that land use review completed has decreased in recent years. And about half of new buildings proposed in the design overlay zone have gone through the objective standards path. Again, only available today outside of the central city, and that's the prescriptive path. And then the last thing I'll say, in recent years, both the Design and Landmarks Commission have not had the workload they've had in past eras, in part because we have fewer projects, as I just showed, also in part because we have some temporary allowances for projects that previously would have gone to the commissions to be reviewed at the staff level. So there's more data in the report that we thought would be interesting both to this group, but also to City Council, and we can talk more about that in the Q&A if it's wanted. But one of the other aspects we wanted to respond to the council request with was giving them a sense of the different economic consequences that come with design review specifically. Council was very interested in sort of this collaboration with staff to get a better understanding of how we might think about the benefits and burdens of design review, and we tried to provide that to them in a way that sets a table for discussion. I won't drill down into each of these tonight. We did try in the report to explain how these things work, but generally for the cost of design review, it comes down to hard costs, which are the actual cost of building something and seeing it to completion. Things like the exterior materials, the articulation of a building, the presence of a courtyard, maybe how a building steps back, those things that are tangible physical costs of development. There are soft costs, which are architecture, engineering, and permitting costs. These are things like the cost of the design review application, the cost of the architect or designer to attend the design review meeting with the design commission, and sort of the cost of additional time to go through the process. And then something we heard about a lot from the development industry and experts was the predictability expense of design review. People who were concerned that a project might not be approved in design review, or design review approval may be appealed, delaying the project, or that there may be a misreading of the approval criteria for design review, causing a drastic building redesign. We did hear from development industry experts that in recent years they've not experienced the uncertainty that maybe existed in the past after those DOZA reforms went into effect. But nonetheless, it's a cost that we heard from development industry experts that is something that is taken seriously. Also in the report, we wanted to detail some of what we see are the sort of benefits both to individual development teams, modifications to otherwise required development standards, the staff expertise that comes with the design review, the opportunity for public comment to improve building and placemaking outcomes, benefit to immediate adjacent tenants and property owners, and citywide benefits as a place that has for 60 years elevated design the built environment as a policy priority. So I won't go into those tonight, but we did try to provide the language in the report for future discussion. So I will wrap up with, I think, maybe the most substantive part of this discussion. And like I said, we can go back and talk about questions people have about how all these things fit together. But City Council was clear that they wanted staff to use this sprint to bring back a handful of both temporary and long-term regulatory reform concepts. And it was an interesting council discussion in the fall because council, I think, was very interested in not acting immediately, but giving staff the opportunity to give them the information they would need to make some future decisions. And so I think it's fair to say for Ryan and for Tim, Stacy, Kara, and Hillary, the rest of the project team, we took this part of the assignment quite seriously, wanting to go back and look at what was done in those last round of reforms, look at the data from recent years, look at case study examples for new development that's occurred in the design overlay zone, the historic overlay, and try to set a menu of policy options that like minds might agree or disagree, but at least to frame a discussion that we knew was coming later this year. One category of what will be 8 reform concepts I'll talk about are administrative and procedural reform concepts, something that PP&D from the leadership level all the way down to the staff and to the commission worked on in the design overlay zone amendments project was an overhaul of their internal administrative processes, how the commission conducts their business, how the commission organizes their thinking, how they respond to developer and applicant questions, and how they make clear, how approval criteria are applied. And so PP&D staff had this opportunity in the recent past to refine and update their administrative processes. What we found is there's room for continued improvement for internal processes at PP&D to ensure that both the public, commissioners, staff, and applicants all have the smooth path through approval that they're looking for. And so we have a bucket of those administrative improvements. Those would not be legislative code amendments. They would be things that would be fit into the work plan as time and budget allows. Council did ask for some temporary ideas to be put on the table. And one of those temporary ideas would be to allow any required design or historic review to be processed by staff and not either the Historic Landmarks Commission or Design Commission. We've done this with the subset of projects already, primarily housing projects. And some of the thinking was an idea would be to allow us to continue to test that out, to have the commission be advisory to the staff and let the staff be the decision maker. And so that was one of the temporary ideas. It's more procedural we put on the table. The more substantive temporary concept that we put on the table was a temporary suspension of mandatory design review. And so what this would look like would be a limited duration suspension of the code triggers that require design review. And so that would be in the downtown area today, new development subject to design review, not allowed to use the objective design standards, or outside of the downtown, certain development that's too large or has some complicating factors today does require going to discretionary design review instead of those objective standards. This concept would temporarily allow any project in the design overlay zone to elect the objective design standards, both downtown and outside of the downtown. This one, the commissioner will be talking about more in the coming weeks and months, and I'll let Ryan finish this out with why that is. But this was one of the more focused of the reform concepts, and we knew there was interest in this both from council and from some of the development industry representatives we talked to. On the longer term horizon, we had 2 topics that have come up during this project, but also in the months and years before, that would be potential permanent code changes or changes to approval criteria in the design overlay zone. One of those would be rewriting what's called the Central City Fundamental Design Guidelines and the applicable sub-district design guidelines. In the past DOZA, Design Overlay Zone Amendments project, the design guidelines for design review that apply outside of the central city were rewritten in whole. One of the future action items that the Design Commission, and if memory serves me, this commission encouraged was for a rethink of the downtown approval criteria for design review called the Central City Fundamentals. That's still very much been a priority of the Design Commission, PP&D staff, applicants, Planning Bureau. And so one of the ideas on the table is number 4 would be to repeal and replace with more contemporary responsive design guidelines for downtown. And the 5th one would be a package of code amendments that would deal with a variety of aspects of the design overlay zone concerning thresholds for when the standards may be used, maybe making some better alignment between neighborhood contact requirements and the design advice request and the design review process, allowing applicants who need to amend the specifics of their proposal after an approved design review to do so through substantial conformance, and a variety of other medium and sort of modest policy changes that we've heard could meaningfully expedite and clarify the application of the design regulations. And the last match that we looked at pertained to the historic resource overlay zone. 3 ideas on the table here. One is one that this commission wrestled with several years ago, which is how height and floor area for new development in historic and conservation districts operate. Today, new buildings in those places are subject to historic review or the historic standards in the case of conservation districts. And those historic review guidelines oftentimes speak to achieving compatibility and responding to existing neighboring development. And in some cases, in some of our districts, the design guidelines speak to a more conservative direction for approval for new development that would otherwise be allowed by the base zone. And so this has created occasional challenges for the Historic Landmarks Commission and staff in reviewing proposals for larger new buildings in districts where the adopted approval criteria, some of which are 30 or 40 years old, speak to a building scale that's much smaller. And so this concept would be to address that issue, both through changes to the code and changes to the official zoning map to try to find the right alignment to reduce conflicts. The last 2, one would be tackling this issue in a parallel way, which would be revising over time, as we've been doing in recent years, outdated historic district design guidelines, starting with the guidelines for the Grand Avenue district, which is in the central east side, where we have seen a challenge between what the guidelines imagine for new development and what the zoning allows. And then finally, conservation districts are an interesting preservation light tool. We've used them here in the city since 1977. Conservation districts currently exist in North and Northeast Portland as a way to honor and recognize the significance and history of places while applying a regulatory but less regulatory approach than historic districts. We've heard from property owners, tenants, preservation-minded people that the current conservation districts are probably too big and they might be in the wrong spots and that their development regulations could be refined. And so we know there's some potential there to further explore how to make that tool work better where it exists today and to be a viable tool if we want to look at it in other places in the future. So those 8 concepts are detailed in the report. In the report, we included a summary of which of these reform concepts we felt had the highest level of priority, both for the development community and in alignment with our comprehensive plan policies and our priorities internally at the staff level. And we did arrive at a place where this bundle of design overlay zone reform concepts was really rising to the top from what we heard from development industry representatives and what we see as areas of challenge. Not to say the rest aren't worthy of consideration, but that was definitely what we were hearing as a reform priority should something come out of this report. Report was transmitted to City Council in May, and I will turn it over to Ryan to talk about where things go from here.
Thanks, Brandon. So as part of the transmittal to the City Council, the BPS and PP&D director gave a cover memo that sort of proposed a path forward proposal of a 2-year temporary suspension of the mandatory design review. So that was the concept that Brandon, concept 3. And then for BPS to develop a work plan for a 2-year legislative project to advance our highest priority concepts. And so we are doing that. So we're on schedule to have before Planning Commission a proposal to temporarily suspend mandatory design review. And then we're also putting together that that work plan, which will have sort of more and less than all of the concepts. So what we're thinking is that the concepts were bucketed for the report in a certain way, and now we're looking at them from a sort of execution and sort of geography. And so we think that there's like a central city focused one that will look at, say, the design fundamentals and may include some historic work as well in the central city. And then the outside the central city, some cleanup of the D overlay.
I think I'll just finish and say the report is online. It's lengthy. And I think from the staff perspective, it was a really good opportunity for staff to collaborate on a quick timeline with our colleagues at PP&D who review proposals every day, all day. And we know each other, but it really gave us an opportunity to take a directed step back and look at what maybe can be improved from code amendments that were just passed a few years ago. And I don't think we found that we made any mistakes with those last projects. I think what we were finding is that the anticipated future work that those projects left on the shelf is still valid future work and valid policy direction for us to explore with downtown design guidelines, streamlining the code, looking at height and floor area and historic districts, administrative improvements. And so it was a good assignment. The Landmarks Commission, Design Commission were more engaged than this commission, in part because they do this work every day. They see applicants for design historic reviews, and they had time in their agenda, which was kind of a miracle for us to get in and be able to have listening sessions with both commissions since we had a very short window of time to do this. But glad we can be here now. Happy to answer questions and talk about any of the information that we presented or anything in the report that we didn't have time to get to tonight.
Thank you. Yes, Commissioner O'Mara.
Thank you so much, Commissioner O'Mara, for the record. Can you please remind me what the Planning Commission's role legislative for this?
It would be for the legislative land use actions. So
Okay.
That we would, if we have on September 22nd, I think we're
That's where I was
going to
at.
be
I saw the
bringing to you-
briefing,
We're
yes.
going to be bringing to you a package of code amendments that would temporarily suspend the mandatory.
Okay,
design
so
review.
that is the element.
That's
It's
the-
not really the decision about the design commission that's coming before.
No.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
And I'll add just one little nuance there, Commissioner. In the event that design guidelines were a priority, and if that was something that happened in future work, historic design guidelines don't come before this commission since they're existing historic districts, not new. Design overlay zone design guidelines, if memory serves me correctly, go to both commissions.
Okay, thank you.
That's my question too. Thank you so much. Commissioner Thompson.
There we go. It's not a very bright light, sorry. One question I had in reading the report a little bit ago and still exists for me after this presentation is Central City master plans and the process for that, because those are big, usually, not always, multi-acre projects that we're talking about, like the OMSI Master Plan, Albina Vision Trust, some of the more recent ones to name a few. And it's not clear to me if we're proposing to pause or suspend design review for projects like that.
Commissioners, perhaps staff have some additional information. I just want to start out by saying, even during the suspension, voluntary design review with the Design Commission is an option. So a master plan site, for example, the Lloyd Master Plan that was just before Design Commission has been at Council on Appeal, that was a voluntary design review. And that option will still be available to people. So I think we're still developing the recommendation. Frankly, there's within the, so I just also wanted to clarify that what's going to be before the Planning Commission on September 22nd is simply the temporary 2-year suspension. The work plan that has been referred to, where we will, that outlines what more permanent regulations we will kind of look at during that 2-year suspension, with an eye to those also being their own legislative processes in the future that will come to the Planning Commission, because that would be amending zoning code. So I just want to make sure it's clear what's coming on the 22nd is just the design review suspension. And that's sort of coupled with this idea that in those 2 years, we would be working on these other high priority recommendations of the report. But we're still working on the kind of finer details of the suspension. Suspension there's some specific call outs in the code about when design review is required or not. And so staff are still kind of working through some of the specifics. And that's what will be before the Planning Commission on the 22nd of September.
Okay. Any more to add to that, or I think maybe I'll just need to wait for more information, and that's okay.
The only
If
thing
that's
I would add,
suggested.
I believe it was the Design Commission, but it may have been both the Design Commission and Landmarks Commission opined recently, what would we do if design review is suspended? But we know that today there are applicants outside of the central city who elect design review because they want something out of the process. They want flexibility, they want to modify a development standard. They're voluntarily choosing that path because it works better for the building program, or it works better for the relationship with the community, or some other reason. And so similar to the city master plans that have different approval criteria than design review, but are reviewed and approved by the Design Commission, under a temporary suspension, it wouldn't be a prohibition on design review. It would be, where design review today is mandatory, it would be optional, and an applicant can choose either the design standards objective or the discretionary design review. We didn't hear a lot of excitement from, frankly, anyone that we talked to about doing something similar to historic review. Historic review is also a much more complicated legal and policy challenge to do something like a temporary suspension. And so in the report, we tried to detail the different regulatory underpinnings of the design overlay zone and the historic resource overlay zone, since they do have pretty different foundations on which they rest. So the conversation on the 22nd of September would be focused on the design overlay zone.
Okay, thank you. And then another question is about the outreach process. And you've shared a little bit about the outreach that happened that informed the proposed recommendations. But going back to like the 3 drivers for design review and being public realm and, context, I'm wondering about how we're thinking about who else should be included in the conversation, how those people are being reached.
For the longer term, the 2-year sort of work program, we'll do engagement plans for those projects, and we'll do our sort of more standard process in thinking about who is in the room, who is affected, how can we outreach to people who might be interested. So that will be part of that work program for those projects. The suspension is temporary, and we're just bringing that in for consideration, the Planning Commission.
And in the report, I think we identified the lack of broad and inclusive public engagement as one of the real challenges of this work, because we had no time to go and do that work. And I think council, or at least the sponsors, saw that too, and trying to find a little time for us to have some conversations with development industry representatives to make sure we were talking about at least the ballpark of what development industry is interested in us talking about, and not being so specific with the recommendations that we've baked the exact outcome. So we didn't we didn't sort of put our heads around what would be the right design guideline approval criteria in the downtown for this moment, because we recognized we just we weren't operating with enough information to get to that place, but we were operating with enough information to recognize the current guidelines are almost 30 years old. They represented one view of downtown from a more limited community perspective, and so we tried to sort of tee up these different recommendations in such a way that the logical public process could lead to a more nuanced and deep, proposal if it came back to this commission.
Okay, well, yeah, understanding there's not resources or time to do like a huge outreach effort, but if through noticing opportunities, like we can just be as intentional about as possible as in making sure that people are aware of what's going on, even though it is only a 2-year period.
And I we'll let the design commission speak for themselves. I'm sure they'll be here before you in September with thoughts. But one of I think from the experience I've had recently and in recent years, the design commission is very excited about participating in and helping craft new downtown design guidelines. It's been a priority in their State of the City report for many years. That's one constituent group, but it's definitely a group that is ready and highly skilled in being able to help bridge us to the communities that would be interested in this.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm thinking about design, about the de-overlay correctly, so maybe you can help clarify. I've always thought of it as like a geographic area. I'm seeing some nods, but then in the code project we just did, it says RM1, RM2, they'll mention RM3, design overlay applies, RM4, design overlay applies. Which is it? Is it tied to the zone, or is it tied to the geographic area, or are they independent assessments?
Well, good question. It's both. So the design overlay zone applies to the entire central city except for industrial lands. Right. So that's the geography. And a decision was made in the last comp plan exercise to focus the design overlay zone on those areas that allow for significant development capacity. And the alignment was with the zone generally to those zones that allowed 4 or 5-story buildings or larger. So the RM3, RM4, CM3, CM2 with bonus if it's in a mixed-use urban center. So those places that you really could get the development capacity. And some of the policy thinking there was to have a solid basis, for public conversations and conversations with decision makers, not to allow the design overlay zone to be applied willy-nilly to an R5 zone here, an RF zone there, a CM1 zone, that we wanted to have a very focused application of the design overlay related to something that we could latch onto, and the base zones, those more intense base zones were the vehicle to do that. There's different ways that can be done, but generally what you see on the map that we can maybe share here is that it tracks with where we see those higher density zones. There are a few outliers. For example, self-storage in zones that are not in a design overlay zone have for a very long time required design review. And so there are a few areas around the margins where we've made policy choices in the past to use the design overlay tools outside of the zone.
Okay, so if there's testimony in the past project that they might apply RM3 more broadly, would that automatically apply the de-overlay more broadly, or is that a separate decision?
The way the code is written today, it would apply it automatically. So a CM3 designation would automatically get the design overlay zone. A CM1 designation would not get the design overlay zone.
Okay.
And again, that was partly to set a framework for the public conversation, decision maker conversation, to make those higher density zones, to better curate how those higher density zones build out in the future, and to limit calls for applying the de-overlay to areas where it wouldn't be appropriate, like the single dwelling zones.
Okay. Last question then is, why do we have a map for design overlay? Why did we just say the zone? If you're in that zone, you have to, one of the things you have to do is, like on the table, design, like, is there a reason to have the map? I guess there's some peculiar small cases, but is there a reason to have a map?
It's because it's an overlay zone. And so we basically map it as an overlay like we do with the historic overlay zone. And so if you look at a property on Portland maps or something, you'll see a little D as the D overlay. Visually, I think the map is helpful for the exercise tonight, but in general, in the code, you don't see the map of like, here's the D overlay. It's just the letter for the overlay is applied two properties that are meeting those qualifying.
Commissioner Speaker, I was just going to say that it's largely for visualization, so people have a sense of where it exists.
I'll just add two things to this conversation. The map that's shown here does show our centers, and you'll note that it's hard to see a little bit on this map, but many of you can sort of see where the centers are based on where the de-overlay zone, and likewise our inner sort of corridors also have de-overlay zone, which is where most of the sort of larger development can occur. And then also, I will say that there is it's a process in the code that when we apply the de-overlay zone, that then we also, if you'll recall, in Montgomery Park, we applied the de-overlay zone, and then we had that joint hearing with the Design Commission, and that was one of the reasons why they were involved in that process, was that we were applying the de-overlay zone, and then they sort of brought them in.
So will they be part of the Inner East Side housing project if there's going to be application of RM3 other places?
We're mapping the de-overlay, that's what our code says.
I think that's a future consideration.
And I think, Commissioner, I mean, it's a policy choice. Unlike historic resources, which are addressed by a state land use goal, Goal 5, design overlay is not addressed by a state land use goal. We try to achieve things that relate to the land use goals through our approval criteria and our standards, but we have significant local policy flexibility with where and to what degree we apply the design overlay zone, with the exception that state law does say outside of the downtown, new development that includes housing is guaranteed a prescriptive path, a clear and objective path. So state law does say, and why we have the two different colors here, and the central city distinction is we can't require a new 19-unit apartment building in the design overlay zone on Northeast Alberta to go through design review. We have to allow a standards path, and they could choose design review, but we have to do that. So that is the one state law, primary state law, that limits how we apply design standards and guidelines.
Yeah, Commissioner Knowles.
So this prompts a question. Does this mean that if you propose suspension of design review, that it will not apply to the RM3 zone and other zones?
It would still,
But at the same time that we're potentially bulking things up, you're going to get rid of design review?
it would still apply. The design overlay still has design standards that would have to be met. And also then the design review is an option and a path for waiving certain provisions and standards in the code.
Commissioner Knowles, the design review overlay zone standards would still apply. We kind of had this discussion when we were talking about the Central City Code Amendment project last time. So when you look at the de-overlay zone in the code, there's a set of standards that are applied through kind of a building permit review process. So those would still apply.
Okay. Now, more generally, I want to say the report that you and your colleagues have prepared is really exceptional in describing the relationship between all of our regulatory tools, the comp plan, state law, regional policy, the design review, historic conservation requirements. It's a great primer, and I commend it to everybody on the commission to take a look at that front end. It's long, but it's just really, really good. So I want to congratulate you on that. Now, I'd like to ask, I'm going to ask you to try to convey to us what our elected leadership was thinking when they set you on this path. What is the problem that they described to you that they wanted you to address?
I'm going to defer to my colleagues here, who don't have the benefit of being in the union. But I want to say one thing that I think was compelling to our council, or at least some members of the council who sponsored this resolution, and that's that our big sibling, or our big cousin, Seattle, has done something similar. So Seattle City Council, a year and some change ago, they did elect to suspend their required design review citywide. In Seattle, design review applied to a much broader geography than it does here. Their tools have not been recently refined as ours have. But the thought in the Seattle City Council was development is sluggish. We're trying to turn over every stone, and design review is one of those stones we'd like to turn over. And the thinking there was, let's pause design review as a requirement, redirect the staff to refine the tools. And we've heard they're looking at many of the tools that we adopted with our DOZA amendments 5 years ago as solutions to some of their problems. And then reinstate design review alongside new tools, new design guidelines, new process tools. And when we heard from City Council and we reviewed the resolution, certainly Seattle was on their mind as this is what another peer city in the region is doing. But I'll look to Ryan and Patricia to talk about the need for a suspension.
I mean, I think that you touched, I mean, I think you got to the point of that matter is that they saw the graphs that we prepared. They are aware of that information, and we're looking for ways to address the problem there. I want to just go back to our discussion of standards. Our colleagues at PP&D would want us to state that many of the design standards are adjustable under a recent the state Senate Bill
1537.
So that's one thing to keep in mind, that would also, that we speak of these standards, but then also they are subject to automatic adjustments, many of them. And we'll try to give more information as to what that looks like when we come back in September. Trying to think if I had any further things to add.
Other information on what the council was seeking, what problem they were seeking to solve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just actually scanning the resolution really quickly to remind us, as much as we've been living in this, it's been a minute since I looked at the resolution, but essentially, I think it's what the staff is saying, which is it's consistent with a lot of things that we've been doing and what, City Council has been concerned with. How do we remove barriers to development? And this is actually, I think the resolution speaks not just to residential development, but also to commercial development. So, a lot of the things we've done recently have been very focused on housing and how to remove barriers to housing. I think the concern is just that we're seeing so little investment and so little development, and wanting to understand, is design review a barrier? That also there were in the report, and I think Brandon touched on it just a little bit, is a discussion about cost. And what kind of cost does design review represent, both from the perspective of that very deeply, but we did to the extent that we could. So it's really about just continuing to identify ways to remove barriers to development, and believing that in the short term we need to do many different things and take many different approaches to kind of stimulate or kickstart or make projects feasible under these market conditions.
One last thing I'll add. What we heard in the council dialogue and the discussion in their adoption of the resolution was that they had not made their mind up about what the right policy outcome was, but that they wanted this report and the subsequent response to council to give them a menu of options from which they could review, opine, hear from an interested public, and then pick a path forward. And at least one council member had said on the record that they had been convinced of a suspension of design review, but that this exercise was a better way to take a deep breath and decide whether or not that was the right policy outcome. And so our hope with the report, and appreciate your nice words about it, is to give that informed menu to council and to the commission to go forward. I think one thing that we hear a lot at the Planning Bureau, and I know a few of you on this commission feel it personally and professionally, design review and historic review matter to a lot of people in this community, and it has for a very long time. And that is true every day in this building, but it's also true for some of our legacy projects that really have been things that Portlanders broadly are proud of, or that really pushed the envelope on urbanism and inclusion. But it also has not been without its challenges. And I think that there's a receptivity on the staff level to continue to get the tools for historic and design review to a place where as a community, they're broadly supported. And so, as we look forward to council and with the report, we know there's a group of people for whom they're very passionate about this, but sometimes we can lose the plot in how we talk about these things. They become technical and they become regulatory, but it's really about how we curate this built environment that we're envisioning. And I think that the report is the first part of council getting the opportunity to learn more about what could work better and what works well today.
My closing thought is that continuous improvement is always good, and you did that just 5 years ago, and continuing to do that is good. Suspending design review seems a little dramatic to me at the moment, but I'm interested in hearing more about what exactly you have in mind.
Questions, thoughts? I may, I remember back in DOZA, just trying to collate some thoughts around this. Former Chair Schultz, I remember her saying a number of times that if a project can, we should be creating design standards such that if a project can go through, can achieve the design standards, then it should be able to go through design review and achieve that. And I have thought about that a lot. I also I so appreciate you highlighting how often people go, project partners go through optional design review, because it is the expertise and the dedication of our colleagues on the Design Commission and the Historic Landmarks Commission is so critical in helping us develop and build out this thriving city that we all love, and that it is lovable and that it is thoughtful in its designs. And so I guess I in part say that it doesn't need to be said, but as someone who I feel a compulsion to appreciate the people who are not in the room that we are kind of speaking about, that really appreciating our colleagues on the Design Commission and Historic Landmarks Commission, and even what they have brought to HBAP and to the Central City Code Amendment Project, and how that helped shape our thoughts. So I also remember hearing recently when Chair Robinson came before us briefly, this question's like, and that, gosh, if we're going to do away with design review for a couple, we really need to be looking at what are the sideboards on standards, and that's something that I'm thinking about, like what are some of the vulnerabilities that we want to make sure are shored up if were we to go on this path. I don't know if any of those were even full sentences, but that's kind of what's been going through my thought. And I appreciate Commissioner O'Mara's question, because I was like, why isn't this a joint hearing with Design Commission? If we're talking about them, it's strange to talk about their work when they are not in the room. I appreciate that it is a quasi-legislative deliberation, but that.
And staff will be briefing both the Design Commission and the Landmarks Commission the week that the proposed draft amendments are released. And so we'll be there. We've scheduled special hearings so we can be there, so they're informed when the code amendments are released for public review.
And could we be apprised of when that happens? So if commissioners wish to attend, that we can do so?
Yeah.
Great.
I think to the week of August, well, late August.
We'll get the dates.
Other questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, we all have, oh yes, Vice Chair Spieth, thank you.
I'm gonna have to talk to staff afterwards on this, because I don't.
You gave them just enough time.
Yeah, just enough time. I don't know why designer.
We don't want to end on my thoughts.
Well, you don't want to end on this one either. It's just curious, like in RM3 zone, you could build a one-story building and design review would apply. It seems like if the intent is to capture the larger buildings, then why isn't it just based on how tall the building is that the FAR is?
So to get the nuance there, in the design overlay zone outside of the central city, residential uses of 4 units or fewer are exempt from design review. So one of our exemptions allows a house, a duplex, a triplex, or a fourplex exempt.
So Bill's an exemption, that makes sense.
So a small building wouldn't trigger design review, but part of the thought of the design review, those core tenets about context, the public realm, and quality and resilience are, or at least the way it works today, are just as important for the 1-story building that occupies a street front as the 5-story building next to it because of the public realm impact. A 1-story building in the RM3 zone you speak of would have the same visual appearance to a pedestrian as a 12-story building next door. And so some of the thought is we're focused on those core tenants and it's less about, the size. But tying it to what could be built for those areas of intensity and urbanism was the policy call in the comp plan.
Okay, I'm glad you had the last word.
Okay, last call for real. No, but thank you. Okay. Well, Ryan Brennan, thank you so much for all of your work and for sharing that with us today. We'll look forward to September 22nd and possibly before. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all. And our next meeting is in 1 month, is it not? We did continue the last project, yes.
We don't have a meeting on August 11th. We're correct. We have a meeting on August 25th. That's when the work session,
Yes.